Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. On today's episode of Thinking in English, I'm going to introduce some English sayings that are really famous but no longer commonly used. Check out the Thinking in English blog for the full transcript of today's episode, and why not head over to my Instagram page for more great content. Idioms, phrases, metaphors, sayings, expressions, proverbs. English, like all languages, is full of this kind of vocabulary. These are common ways of describing our feelings, talking about situations, and much more. I've recorded quite a few previous episodes introducing such vocabulary to all of you listeners. But something I always try to be cautious of doing is recommending that you use such vocabulary or phrases all the time. I think it is important that English learners know and understand idioms or expressions, but I think it is far less important that you actually use them in sentences, in conversations, or in real life. Why? Using the expressions and proverbs you learn incorrectly can be confusing. Idioms and metaphors are not always suitable in every situation, and a lot of phrases and sayings are now a little out of date. You should know phrases in case you ever hear them or read them in a book, but I don't necessarily think you should stress out too much about using them in your own language. Actually, this is one of the reasons why I've gradually changed the kind of vocabulary episodes I record for Thinking in English. Online, on Instagram, on YouTube, and probably on other podcasts, English teachers and influencers are constantly trying to tell you all how to speak advanced English. And that is the purpose of this podcast, Thinking in English. Introducing natural but advanced English in an accessible way. However, sometimes the advanced English I see being promoted on Instagram is not advanced. It's just an out-of-date idiom that no one really uses. Let me give you an example. As I'm writing this podcast, I literally picked up my phone and scrolled down Instagram. And I found a post with 13,000 likes introducing normal English and then a better English alternative. And this page is actually followed by a lot of my followers as well. So some of you listening probably follow pages like this. The post suggests that instead of saying be quiet, say put a sock in it. Instead of saying stressed, they suggest knickers in a twist. Put a sock in it, knickers in a twist. Is this really better English? No. No, it's not. It's just a different way of saying a phrase. And it's not better. In fact, I would say in most situations, these phrases are probably worse. But the English pages on Instagram, with hundreds of thousands of followers, know the kind of content people want. They know the kind of content you want. You want to become an advanced English speaker. So they pretend phrases and idioms are more advanced than regular phrases. They pretend that put a sock in it or knickers in a twist are better than the non-idiom vocabulary. Again, it's important and maybe useful if you know such phrases. But using them does not make your English more advanced. I'm going to tell you a fact that most English teachers, and especially English vocabulary Instagram pages, don't want you to know. English speakers probably don't use the phrases, sayings, and idioms you are trying to learn. The phrases and sayings that you spend hours and hours every day trying to remember and use in sentences are probably never used by people like myself. Wait a minute. What does he mean English speakers don't really use such phrases and sayings? Well, recently I read some research from Perspectus Global, who found 30 traditional English sayings that are no longer commonly used. According to the research, 52% of English speakers under 50 have never used the phrase put a sock in it, and 56% have never used knickers in a twist. The Instagram account I talked about earlier suggested that these two phrases were better or more natural English, but they are dying out, going extinct, and will probably become even less common in the future. Using such phrases doesn't make you sound more intelligent or more advanced. It makes you sound out of date. I know I'm probably repeating myself, but it is useful to know these idioms and metaphors, even the old ones, because they may appear in books, TV shows, and even the occasional conversation. And it can provide you with some contextual knowledge and English, I guess, a feeling for the English language. However, you should know when the phrases you're being taught are not actually common. Now, I've introduced you to a lot of idioms and phrases in the past, both on the podcast and on the Instagram page. And now I feel a little guilty about not making it always super clear if such phrases are relatively obscure. Every Tuesday on Instagram, I post a different idiom or proverb, but actually only one of those, selling like hotcakes, appears on the Perspectus Global's list of 30 dying idioms. Over the last few months, I've tried to change up the vocabulary content on the podcast, introducing more useful vocabulary rather than exclusively idioms or proverbs. If you ever have any recommendations or topics, reach out and let me know. Language changes all the time, and the phrases that were common in the past are often no longer used today. The rest of this episode will introduce 8 phrases that are rarely used now. But these are 8 phrases I've seen all being suggested on Instagram by other tutors or teachers or content pages. Ready for the Knacker's yard. You should recognize this phrase from the title of the episode. If something is ready for the Knacker's yard, it means it is broken or failed due to being useless or obsolete. The Knacker's yard is a name for a slaughterhouse for horses. So basically, a place where old horses are killed. However, 62% of people under the age of 50 have never used this phrase in their entire lives. There are a few reasons this has become unpopular, including the fact that knacker has been used as an offensive term for minority groups in the UK and Ireland. Pardon my French. Pardon my French is used to apologize for bad language and swearing. It was commonly used to suggest the curse words and bad language you use are actually part of the French language. Now, only 48% of people under 50 have actually used this phrase. I think British English speakers are increasingly comfortable with using swear words. And it is quite obvious that the words are not French. Have a gander. Have a gander or to take a gander means to look at something, peek at something, or read through something. It actually comes from the bird goose. A male goose is called a gander, and the way these birds turn their necks to look at things has been borrowed to suggest a person looking at something. Despite this, Having a gander is becoming rarer and rarer. 49% of people have never used this phrase. Raining cats and dogs. This one might surprise you. I think it is one of the most popular idioms with English learners. Raining cats and dogs means heavy rain. It is not really known how the phrase started, but it has been used for hundreds of years. According to the research, however, only 51% of people have ever used this phrase. I think it is now a little cliché. It has been used so much that it has lost its meaning. Mad as a hatter. Mad as a hatter means completely insane or crazy. It is a term to refer to someone who is suffering from insanity. And it actually has a really interesting origin. Hatters are people who make hats. And in the past, the hatting industry used a lot of chemicals, including the metal mercury. And mercury can cause mental issues and mental health problems. So, hatters were often mad. Alice in Wonderland, the famous book, also has the character the Mad Hatter, a man who makes hats and is quite mad. Only 49% of people under 50 have actually used this phrase. Mad is no longer considered the correct way to describe people suffering from mental health problems. Storm in a teacup. A storm in a teacup is a situation in which people are very angry or upset about something that is not important. It can also be said as a tempest in a teacup. It's a small and an unimportant problem which is treated too seriously. But 55% of people have never used that phrase. Drop them a line. Drop them a line means to call someone on the phone. I actually saw this on a vocabulary lesson from another English content creator on Instagram. However, 53% of people have never used this phrase. Why? Well, people tend to not call someone using traditional phones anymore. We use instant messaging, text messages, emails, Zoom, and many other things instead. So here is today's final thought. This episode of Thinking in English has tried to warn you all about using obscure English idioms, phrases, sayings, proverbs, and metaphors. While some English teachers may encourage you to use such phrases, I would be more cautious. They are not necessarily better or advanced English, and often such phrases are going extinct. What is an English phrase you've learnt but never actually used? Let me know in the comments on the blog, leave a comment on Spotify, or send me a message on Instagram.